Have you ever felt like love is something you inherited, but not always in the best way? Maybe you love like your parents did. Quietly, cautiously, or only when it feels safe. I used to think love was something that just happens to you. But living in Denmark taught me something different. That love, like language, must be learned, practiced, and spoken aloud. This is the story of how I relearned love one English word at a time. The silence I grew up with. I grew up in a house where silence was the wallpaper. It covered everything: the dinner table, the car rides, even birthdays. No one ever said, "I love you." We just existed together. My parents weren't cruel, they were simply quiet. My father showed love by fixing things: the broken chair, the leaking pipe, the cracked window. My mother showed love by cooking too much food. But words? They stayed locked behind their lips as a child. I didn't realize how much I was learning from that silence. It taught me to listen for feelings, not words. It taught me to guess what love looked like instead of hearing what it sounded like. And maybe that's why later in life I became afraid of saying what I really felt in any language. When I moved to Denmark, I discovered something strange. The silence followed me, not from my parents but from the culture. Danes aren't loud about emotions. They show affection through calmness, through respect for space, through quiet understanding. Felt familiar, almost too familiar. But deep down I started to wonder, was I truly comfortable with this, or just conditioned by my childhood? I remember one evening sitting in my small apartment in Aarhus. Outside, snow was falling gently, and I was drinking tea. I suddenly realized I hadn't spoken to anyone all day. My phone was silent, my thoughts were loud, and my heart felt lonely. Not because no one cared, but because I didn't know how to reach out. That moment hurt, but it was also the beginning. The beginning of seeing silence not as comfort, but as a cage. You see, psychologists say that children from emotionally quiet homes often grow into adults who fear expressing love. Not because they don't feel it, but because they don't trust that words can hold it safely. That was me. I was fluent in hiding what I felt. And yet, as I started learning English more seriously, something inside me began to shift. Maybe it's easier to express love in a language that isn't soaked in family history. Maybe "I love you" feels lighter when it's not tied to old silence. I didn't know it then, but this language, English, would become my tool to unlearn the quiet. That's where the real story began. With one person, one foreign language, and a lifetime of silence waiting to be translated. The first time I said, "I love you," it happened by accident. I wasn't planning to say it. It just slipped out. 3 small words that felt too big for my mouth. "I love you." The moment they left my lips, the world seemed to stop breathing. My heart raced, my throat went dry, and my brain screamed, "What did you just do?" It was a cold evening in Copenhagen. I was talking to someone I cared about deeply. Someone who had helped me feel seen in this foreign land. We were sitting on a bench near the canal, hands wrapped around warm paper cups of coffee. The city was quiet, and maybe that's why it happened. I ran out of things to hide behind. The words felt strange in English, light, almost fragile. But they were honest. For the first time, love wasn't something I served through actions. It was something I dared to name. And you know what? They didn't say it back. Not right away. The silence that followed was sharp, almost familiar. Like my childhood returning to remind me, "See? This is why we don't say things like that. But here's the twist. I didn't regret it. For the first time, I realized that saying, "I love you," wasn't about getting a response. It was about setting myself free from the fear that love had to stay hidden. Later that night, walking home, I laughed. Out loud. It was ridiculous, me. Laughing alone under the Danish streetlights because I finally said the scariest sentence in the world. But it felt like oxygen rushing into my chest. Psychologists say vulnerability triggers both fear and connection. When you open your heart, your brain panics, it thinks you're in danger. That's why your body shakes, your voice cracks, and your face burns. But it's also the exact signal that tells your nervous system, you're alive. That night, I learned that saying love out loud is like speaking a foreign language. Clumsy at first, full of mistakes, but deeply human. And sometimes the beauty isn't in being understood, but in daring to speak. So if you've ever swallowed your feelings because you feared rejection, remember this. Love unspoken is love unfinished. The Danish way of showing love. If you ever live in Denmark, you'll notice something. People rarely say, "I love you," but they mean it all the time. They show it in the way they respect your space, bring you a cup of coffee without a word, or light a candle on a dark winter morning just to make the room feel softer. That's hygge, the Danish art of quiet care. First, I loved it. It matched my upbringing perfectly. No dramatic gestures, no loud declarations, just calm, steady warmth. It was love without noise, and it felt safe. But soon that same silence began to ache again. Because while the Danish way of love is peaceful, it can also be lonely. There's a funny paradox here. Denmark is one of the happiest countries in the world, but also one of the most private. People don't invade your space. Not physically, not emotionally. It's beautiful and respectful. But if you're someone still learning how to speak love out loud, it can feel like everyone is whispering through walls. One evening, a Danish friend invited me over for dinner. It was cozy, candles, wine, soft music. At the end of the meal, I said, "Thank you, this was wonderful." She smiled and said, "Of course." That was it. "No, I'm so glad you came." "No, I love spending time with you." Just, "Of course." But that "of course" stayed with me. It was a tiny phrase carrying a mountain of meaning. Said, "You belong here. You don't need to earn my kindness." I realized then that love doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just nods quietly from across the table. Still, as I learned more Danish, I began to notice something else. There isn't an everyday word for love in casual conversation. Jeg elsker dig is reserved for deep romantic feelings, almost sacred. So instead, people show love through time, through reliability, through trust. It's like saying "I love you" without moving your lips. That cultural lesson changed me. It taught me to see love in small things. In punctuality, in silence, in the way someone remembers how you take your coffee. But it also reminded me of a truth I couldn't ignore. If I only show love but never say it, I might repeat the very pattern I came here to escape. So I began to wonder, was I learning a new language of love, or just decorating my old silence with candles? Repeating my parents' lesson. It took me years to realize that I was becoming my parents, not in the way I looked but in the way I loved. I thought moving to Denmark, learning a new language, and building a new life would make me different. but patterns have a sneaky way of surviving. They hide inside your habits, your tone, your silence, that I started noticing it in small things. When a friend hugged me and said, "I'm so happy to see you," my instinct was to laugh it off. When someone texted me, "I miss you," I replied with a smile emoji. Not because I didn't feel the same, but because I didn't know how to say it back. That's when I knew I was repeating the same love lesson I had inherited. Love quietly, love responsibly, but never out loud. It was a strange kind of inheritance. My parents taught me to love through duty, to show care through doing, not speaking. My father fixed, my mother cooked, and I listened. I thought love meant keeping things peaceful, not emotional. But peace without words slowly turns into distance. In Denmark, that distance feels even easier. People respect boundaries, which means no one pushes you to open up. You can live years surrounded by kindness, yet never touch the heart of anyone. It's comfort disguised as connection. One night, after a small argument with someone I cared about, I caught myself saying, "It's fine." That was my mother's favorite sentence. But it wasn't fine. My voice sounded exactly like hers, calm, tired, holding too much inside. And that's when I finally understood. I wasn't avoiding conflict. I was avoiding vulnerability. Psychologists call this emotional inheritance, the invisible patterns we carry from our families. You don't choose them consciously. They live in your nervous system. When you were a child, your brain recorded how love felt, not through lessons but through repetition. And unless you question it, you keep replaying it. So I began asking myself, what love lesson am I repeating? The answer wasn't comfortable. It was, love is something you prove, not something you say. And that belief was quietly choking my relationships. The hardest part wasn't blaming my parents, it was forgiving them, and then forgiving myself for copying them. Because they did their best with the emotional vocabulary they had. And now it's my turn to expand that vocabulary, in both English and love. That night I wrote 3 words on a piece of paper: break the pattern. And that became my quiet promise to myself, to speak even when it feels unsafe. Learning to speak love aloud. They say learning a new language rewires your brain, but I think it also rewires your heart. The more I practiced English, the more I noticed something unexpected. The words I feared most in my native tongue came easier in this new one. I miss you. I care about you. I love you. Somehow, in English, they didn't sound dangerous. They sounded human. At first, it felt silly. I practiced these phrases out loud, alone in my small Danish kitchen. I'd stand there making coffee and whisper, "I love you," sometimes to the empty air, sometimes to my reflection. My accent was heavy, my tone uncertain, but each time I said it, I felt something melt inside. Because here's the thing. When you don't grow up hearing emotional words, your tongue doesn't know how to carry them. You have to teach it slowly, patiently, just like pronunciation. Saying "I love you" became an act of training my emotional muscles. I started using little chances to practice. When friends did something kind, I'd say, "That means a lot to me." When someone listened, I said, "Thank you for hearing me." Each sentence felt like unlocking a door that had been shut for years. Science backs this up. Research in linguistics and psychology shows that naming emotions activates the brain's prefrontal cortex, the part that helps regulate feelings. In simple terms, when you put love into words, your brain actually learns to feel it more clearly. But it wasn't just about language. It was about permission. Each English phrase gave me permission to feel what I'd been avoiding. And strangely, that made me a better listener too. When I began speaking love, I also began hearing it. In other people's words, in their tone, even in their pauses. One day, I texted a friend, "I appreciate you." It was small, but they replied, "You just made my day." I stared at that message for a long time. That's when I realized this is how healing begins. Not through therapy or philosophy alone, but through small spoken kindness. So I kept practicing. English wasn't just a language anymore. It was therapy with subtitles. Every word I spoke rewrote a little bit of my past. And maybe that's the secret no one tells you. Learning to speak love aloud isn't about finding the right words. It's about daring to mean them. When language heals the heart, it happened quietly, like most important things in life. I was sitting in a small cafe in Odense, talking to my mother on a video call. She was back home thousands of miles away. Normally, our conversations were polite, predictable. "Are you eating well? Are you cold? Don't forget to sleep early." That day, though, something was different. I could hear the tiredness in her voice. Maybe she could hear something in mine too, and suddenly, without planning it, I said in English, "Mom, I love you." Silence. For a long moment I thought the internet froze. Then she laughed nervously, a little confused. "Why English?" she asked. I smiled and said, "Because I'm still learning how to say it right." That was the first time I ever said those words to her. Not in my native language, but in the one that had taught me courage. Somehow, English gave me the distance I needed to be honest. It was like stepping out of an old emotional costume and finally breathing freely. After that day, something shifted between us. We didn't suddenly become an affectionate family. But her messages changed. She started sending heart emojis. She ended calls with "Take care, my child." Small things, but they mattered. It felt like a crack in the wall had finally let sunlight in, that I realized that language can heal not because it's perfect, but because it gives us a new voice when the old one is stuck. When we switch languages, we also switch emotional patterns. Our brain resets its rules. That's why many people find it easier to talk about pain or love in a second language. It feels safer, more spacious, and in that sense, English became more than just a skill for me. It became a bridge. A bridge between the child who stayed silent and the adult who finally spoke. Between generations, between cultures, between the heart I inherited and the one I'm building. That's when I truly understood. Learning English wasn't just about grammar or pronunciation. It was about learning emotional fluency, the courage to name feelings before they disappear. And maybe that's what healing really is, not forgetting the old language of pain, but learning a new one for love. Teaching my heart a new grammar. I used to think grammar was just about verbs and tenses. But the more I learned about love in English, in Danish, in life, the more I realized the heart has its own grammar too. It has subjects and objects, pauses and punctuation, even silent commas where words should have been. And just like any language, if you don't practice, you forget how to speak it. For years my heart's grammar was simple but incomplete. I knew how to care for people but not how to talk to them. I knew how to listen but not how to respond. I could give affection in action but not in words. It was like writing sentences without verbs, emotion without motion, so I started re-educating my heart. Slowly. First lesson. Affirmation is not weakness. When you tell someone you matter to me, you're not being dramatic, you're being precise. It's emotional grammar, stating the subject, you, the verb, matter, and the truth. Second lesson, boundaries are punctuation. You can't just pour love endlessly. You need commas, full stops, and sometimes question marks. I need time. I'm not ready. Those are still love sentences, just with careful punctuation. Third lesson, repetition builds fluency. You don't learn a language by saying something once. You repeat it until it becomes natural. The same goes for love. Say it often, even when it feels awkward. Especially when it feels awkward. First, I made mistakes, emotional typos. I said too much or too late or to the wrong person. But that's how learning works. Every stumble was still progress. Every awkward, I miss you or thank you for listening trained my heart to form clearer, braver sentences. And here's the scientific part that amazed me. The brain literally changes when you repeat new emotional patterns. Each honest word fires new neural pathways, connecting thought and feeling more efficiently. In other words, speaking love rewires you, grammar and all. Now, when I talk about love, I pause less. I don't translate my feelings before expressing them. My heart has become bilingual, fluent in both silence and speech. And maybe that's the real mastery. Not perfect grammar, but emotional clarity. Knowing when to whisper, when to speak, and when to simply be. Because every I love you, no matter how small, is a lesson your heart never forgets. The love I'll pass on. Sometimes I wonder what my future children, or even my students, my friends, my loved ones will inherit from me. Not my language skills, not my accent, but my way of loving. Because love, like language, is passed down not through lectures, but through living examples. When I look back, I see a line of quiet generations, people who loved deeply but rarely said so. And now, standing in the middle of my life in Denmark, surrounded by a culture that values calm and space, I realize it's my turn to change the melody, to add words where there used to be silence. I no longer want to hand down a love that hides behind gestures or politeness. I want to pass on a love that speaks softly, honestly, imperfectly. A love that says, I care about you, even when the voice trembles. A love that listens and answers. Point one day. I hope someone I love will remember me not for my achievements, but for the words I dared to say. For the moments I reached across fear and whispered, you matter. Because those small sentences, those tiny acts of linguistic courage, can ripple through generations. Living in Denmark has taught me something profound. Love doesn't have to be loud, but it should always be alive. You can keep the calm, the quiet, the cozy, but never let love become invisible. So now, every time I light a candle in my apartment, I say something out loud, a gratitude, a kind thought, sometimes just a name. It's my ritual of reprogramming the silence. It's how I remind myself that love isn't inherited. It's learned anew every day in every language. Because the truth is, love doesn't stay unless you speak it. And when you do, it multiplies in your home, in your heart, in the hearts of those who come after you. That's the legacy I want to leave behind. Not a perfect love, but a spoken one.